Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 80 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by our friends at PSCU. As the nation's premier payments CUSO, PSCU proudly supports the success of more than 1,500 credit unions. My name is Randy Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Monica Davy. Monica is the director of the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion at the NCUA. Needless to say, Monica has been extremely busy recently. I was so glad she made the time to be on the show today. She is someone I've been looking forward to having a conversation with since Jill introduced us back at GAC this year, which now seems like a lifetime ago. We talked about the work Monica and the NCUA have been doing for the past 4 years and how that has put them in a position to lead the DEI conversation, not only through this global pandemic shared experience we call COVID-19, but also the protests and the conversations that have come with it since the killing of George Floyd. This was an important conversation to have, and I was so glad that Monica was willing and able to share her thought leadership and make the time for us today. She had so many ideas on what credit unions can do now and in the future to be leaders and the change makers in that people helping people that we all hold true and close to us. So I have to say, I could have stayed in the first section of this show for hours, but we did move on to the leadership and the life hacks portion of the show. I loved when Monica talked about the difference between mentors and sponsors and the importance of both in life and our careers. It still has me thinking on that one. As always, we have some fun with the rapid fire questions to wrap up the show. I left this conversation excited for the next opportunity I have to speak with Monica. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode and take a lot of actionable ideas from it. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Monica Davy. Enjoy. Monica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I've been looking forward to this conversation since Jill introduced us at GAC, and I just thought that, the work that you've been doing at the NCUA and the DEI work that you guys were doing even last year, I know you held a forum and everything like that I spoke with Chairman Hood about when he was on the show. So you were somebody I wanted to always get on the show. And I mean, now is probably even more timely than ever, right? So yes. I appreciate you today.
Sure. And I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. One thing that I would like to throw out for everybody is in the past year since Jill started Humanity, there's been more DEI books, and I will probably be quoting things that I've learned from her. So instead of giving her credit every time, I'm just going to say, if I say something smart, it's from Jill. So right up front. But
Jill's awesome.
that's the truth. So when we were first getting our schedules together, I had planned on really talking to you quite a bit about just the importance of the continued DEI effort during a global pandemic. It's not like, I don't think any of us planned for this, right?
Right.
Something that we've experienced. And I still want to make sure we talk about that. But since we scheduled, a lot has changed, since the death of Mr. Floyd, just the protests that we've seen since then that have continued. This is the space you work in. I mean, so I'll throw it out there as just a very big question, but are there best practices? Are there things that we should all be doing as leaders in credit unions to make sure that the commitment to DEI and even that the greater good is, happening for the long term?
Yeah, it's been a really emotional time. I think, as a matter of fact, you and I were probably scheduled to have a conversation last week, and my world blew up because of everything that's going on right now, and we had to push it off. So, yeah, it's a really emotional time. And while, yes, this is my space, this is the work I do, I am a Black woman.
Yep.
So it's been raw emotion for me as well. One of the things I'm extremely fortunate about, and I think this is an example for other organizations, is that NCUA, I started having conversations probably 4 years ago.
Yeah.
We hold monthly what we call OMWE Talks. The name of my office is the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion. And so we modeled it after kind of like TED Talks. And we have OMWE Talks monthly. They're voluntary sessions where people can come in and we talk about tough issues like privilege and bias and racism and sexism and gender identity. We talk about all kinds of issues. And so after about 2 years of having those conversations, I started asking our executive leaders to lead those conversations.
Okay.
And so each session was led by an NCUA executive. It increased their cultural competency. It opened their eyes to other perspectives. And it allowed employees, obviously, to hear perspective of others. So when the George Floyd killing happened, NCUA was in a miraculous position to start those conversations right away.
Yeah.
I had to say was we're going to host racial injustice Envoy talks. And just like that, we started them. We've had 15 sessions scheduled. And, we limit them to 25 people a session so that people can have an opportunity to open up. And our Chairman Hood, participates in every single one of the sessions. So
that's fantastic.
To allowing employees to it's just about allowing employees to process out loud what's going on and for other employees to listen and learn. They're very emotional. They're raw. I haven't attended one yet where I wasn't in tears. But the fact that we have our chairman's commitment to attend each one. So that's a lesson for all credit union CEOs that you have to have commitment from the top. And if you had been having these conversations all along, when this incident came up, you were prepared and ready. And you already had a format for employees to be able to engage and a trusted, safe space where they could talk about this stuff out loud. So I'm fortunate that I'm in an organization where we were doing that. And I have seen and heard from so many employees. And this is the thing that I take away from many of the conversations, that so many of our Black employees were not surprised by what happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we've been living with for decades. And as Chairman Hood says, centuries, that, the fact that people come to work every day with a smile on their face and still performing, still soaring in their careers is to be applauded, because we have been trained to kind of compartmentalize all these emotions, put a cap on it, and still come to work to perform. So I think it was very eye-opening to many of our non-Black colleagues to hear that level of pain and to understand what people are going through.
Boy, I appreciate you saying that. And there was so much to unpack there. Something that I noticed is, you talked about these sessions that you had already been doing for 4 years, something that rang true. And my guess is this is in any organization. It can't just be the DEI coordinator or the HR person or whoever it happens to be. Like, to truly get buy-in, we need that, like, Chairman Hood is there, like you said, right? Like the leaders of the organization are also part of this conversation. And that seems to be an important takeaway for.
And that's where you start, right? You start with the head of the organization. But in the diversity space, we refer to something as the frozen middle. A lot of times you get to the place where you have leadership saying that they're committed. But then if it stops there, it's not going to trickle down. And so your employees don't necessarily believe that the organization as a whole is committed. Only the person at the top is talking about commitment. So it's very important that that commitment trickle down to the middle managers all the way to those frontline managers, so that the employees actually believe that the organization is committed to it.
Do you have any hacks on that for the CEO who's like, I'm committed, but we need to not stall it at maybe the C-suite, correct? I mean,
so, in the diversity space, we talk about accountability, right? So making sure that your managers, as far as how they're evaluated on their performance, that there's actually a performance element around diversity and inclusion. So it's not about, and I never want people to get in this space about counting the number of people you have. Is so much more important than that. It's about how inclusive you are as a leader, how much you value other people's opinion. All those things you can evaluate your managers on to make sure they're being held accountable for creating an inclusive work environment.
Yeah, that's good advice there. That's for sure. That idea that we have to measure stuff. We measure everything else, right? So,
right. And we know if it doesn't get measured, it won't get done. Right?
It doesn't get done. Correct. Yeah, that's for sure. One thing I just wanted to make sure to ask for maybe some of the CEOs that are out there listening today is, are there best practices for not only, say, creating those inclusive opportunities for everybody, but also, creating that safe space at work to, use Gerald's term, bring your whole self to work, in the credit unions out there?
Yep, absolutely. Again, I think it's important to have those conversations. It has to be something, It can't be a diversity day or diversity week or one diversity conference.
Yep.
It has to be ingrained with how you do business. So making sure that you have regular conversations around these topics is critically important. If you're an organization that's large enough, creating employee resource groups, that's practice, right? I know sometimes with the smaller credit unions, we can't do that. With the larger credit unions, making sure that people have abilities to connect with each other who have like interests, but you're not limiting those connections to people in those groups, because it's very important for allies also to be a part of those groups. But that's considered the best practice. Obviously, having a leadership commitment statement is something where you can start. That's easy, but you got to get beyond the words.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've done at NCUA is we've created a culture, diversity, and inclusion council. So some people may refer to them as just a diversity council, but a group of employees whose purpose is to examine what type of organization we have and making recommendations for how we can improve it. And it's very important that you have a cross section of employees from executive level down to your frontline employees, but that their purpose is to come together and to be responsible for looking at what type of organizational culture you have and making recommendations for improvement.
I would have to assume too, it's those recommendations are being heard, right? Like
That's
people
right.
can get frustrated if they're not. This over the past few weeks, Jill and I have been having these conversations. In my mind, I keep thinking that like credit unions were built for helping in this, like, what I would say is a systemic change. Something that she's always mentioned is, education. I'm a small business owner. I think about access to credit. Most Americans, their largest asset is their home. So the idea that credit unions, like looking at their lending policies, could make real change in like who has access to credit seems like there's an amazing opportunity here, right? Like to be a part of this.
Absolutely. I mean, you've heard the words being thrown around the past couple of weeks, systemic racism. Right? Yep. So I think that credit unions in the financial services industry, we sit in an incredible space to be able to impact this issue. Even when it comes to COVID-19, I was reading an article yesterday about why COVID-19 hit communities of color harder, right? And it's because of health disparities. And a lot of the health disparities come from, if you think about systemic racism, the stress of having to deal with systemic racism has a physical impact on your body.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? And then when you think about the wealth gap, home ownership, look at the historical instance of government sanctioned redlining. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
So how African-American homes are valued, have a different value on them than white homes, and what that does to generational wealth. So we are in a great position as a financial services industry and as credit unions to actually address these racial inequities through how we lend, the mortgages that we give. And I think that it's exciting to know that we work in a space where we can have this level of impact. And I'm just hoping that with the outcry that we're hearing from the country, that we will grab hold within the credit union movement to this opportunity that we have to impact change.
I'm with you on that. That's for sure. What challenges have you seen? Like I mentioned, I want to make sure we touch on COVID-19 a little bit, since that it's here to stay for a little while. But what challenges have you seen in the DEI space, maybe since COVID-19? My guess is a lot of people in the beginning were just like, oh, how do we open the doors or whatever, or do business. But
yeah, so Randall, this is a fascinating point to me. I can tell you, I even have my own personal challenges within my organization on this. When COVID-19 hit, we're all scrambling. Do you have a computer to be at home?
Yep.
Can everybody telework and work from home? How can we offer our products to our members with our doors being closed? And I don't think that anybody was thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. People were like, I hear you, Monica, that's important, but right now I got to figure out if my folks have a computer. Well, if you're not thinking about the diverse communities that people live in, the diverse problems that people have within their homes, then you're going to miss the boat on how to deal with COVID-19 from your membership perspective or your employee perspective. So I think it's interesting that the George Floyd and the racial inequities hit and DEI then got pushed up a little bit because now people are paying attention. And I don't think that people realize that COVID-19 was going to have the disparate impact on communities of color. And it became even more important. We can't put diversity, equity, inclusion on the shelf. It's something that we always need to be paying attention to. If you have more than 2 members, you have diverse members, right?
Right.
And so thinking about the diverse communities that you serve should always be something that's top of mind if you're trying to make sure that we are meeting our mission of people helping people. By definition, people are diverse. We need to be thinking about the diverse needs of our members, the diverse needs of our employees, if we are going to have an effective organization.
Absolutely. Do you think that everything that we're going through today, whether it's, COVID or the look at racism, quite honestly, that, front and center is going to change the way that members interact with credit unions going forward?
I hope so. I hope that something comes out of it. I think that one of the things that has impacted in any organization, it has really upped our game with technology, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I know at even my organization, not everybody was a fan of telework.
Yeah.
And now, look at us. Everybody's doing a pretty good job, right? And it has caused us to be able to rely on technology more. For some of those credit unions that maybe weren't comfortable with technology, I think that they've been pushed a little bit more to realize that technology can work and they can get the job done with technology. So I think that that's one thing. With respect to the racial injustice conversation, I think it's very important that we don't limit our conversation to what's happening in the law enforcement arena. That this pervasive racism, unconscious bias that we're talking about, it's not just in the police system. And I always like to say, whenever we talk about this, I know that the majority of police are good. Mm-hmm. That, my husband and I were having this conversation, this debate. He said, are you really saying that you think that most police are bad? I'm like, no, I don't think that. I do think that, like most human beings, all police have unconscious bias.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so if you have that unconscious bias and you put that in the hands of all this power that police have, then we get the situation that we're in. But I want to be very careful that we don't think that this problem only exists there. This systemic racism is in all of our institutions. And it's incumbent upon all of us to examine what those barriers are that we have in our systems, in our policies, and our procedures that we can slowly chip away at the racism that exists. But, it's something that we have dealt with as a country for 400 years. It's not going to go away overnight.
Right. You mentioned unconscious or, biases. And that's, for me, that's one of those places where whether it's you're a hiring manager or whoever, just where you may not even know, right? Like that you have them if you don't look and listen. And, I mentioned on another podcast in a meditation I was doing, it was this idea of listening to understand instead of to respond. And I've been actively trying to do that more because I like to talk. But it's been so helpful to think about.
And then people realize that when I think sometimes people get offended and their guard goes up, just like when you hear the word privilege, your guard goes up. But unconscious bias, we all have it. We're wired to be biased, right? And so it's just trying to make sure that you become as aware as you can of the fact that you have bias and stop yourself when you're making a decision or an action and check your bias.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. That's for sure. You mentioned technology in previous answer. Is there something you think credit unions need to do to stay relevant? We've seen the pace of change in financial services across the board. We've already kind of talked about some of the opportunities that credit unions exist, but is there something that we all need to do different?
So I think that this is another situation where diversity in our boardrooms become very important, right? And I think that if you look at the average age of our board members is pretty old. And I think that to the extent that we can not just include gender and racial diversity in our boardrooms, but generational diversity, right? And making sure that we have people, we are trained to use technology, but we know the younger generations, they're native to technology. And I think that it's really important that we make sure that we infuse that innovative thinking into our credit union spaces, whether it's in our boardroom or on our management teams, so that we can get ahead of where technology is going and push ourselves as an industry to make sure that we're staying ahead of technology in those spaces. I think that the brick and mortar credit union we know is kind of not going away, but a lot of people are much more dependent on this device right here.
Absolutely.
Sure that We give the members what they need through technology.
Yeah, I agree with you. Your point on the makeup of boards is another one that I couldn't agree more on. Even just the idea of like, if everybody is the same and looks the same on the board, even the products that they need from the credit union, it might not make sense to them, right?
That's
like,
right.
So to have that, even the diversity in need, right? Like, it's look like your member, right? Last question in this section. I could talk to you forever about this, but I want to keep it moving along. If we were to sit down a year from now, what are you most proud of that yourself, your team, your like the NCUA as a whole has accomplished? If you had to break out the crystal ball for me.
So two things. I'm really happy that 4 years ago I wouldn't have known that we would have been in this space. I'm happy that we pushed ourselves to have these monthly conversations. They have been a game changer within our culture at NCUA. So many people, these conversations that we are having right now about what's going on, so many people have said, I've worked in many organizations and never have I worked in an organization where they've given us this space to cry and to be angry and to question what we're feeling right now. And we kid ourselves if we think that people can walk into the door and leave that stuff outside. So
absolutely,
bring in your whole self to work. People are bringing all that stuff in. And if they are thinking about it and it's taking up space in their brains, then they're not giving up their full selves to what you're asking them to do at work. So making sure you create a space where people can process all that, I think is critically important. The other thing I will say that I am extremely proud of that we've done at NCUA, it's our employee resource groups.
Yeah.
And I never would have imagined that they would have the impact that they've had at NCUA. And as you can imagine, 85% of our workforce is spread out in the field because they're examiners, and they're sitting in their homes. If they're not in the credit union, they're sitting in their homes. And many of them have said that they have lacked feeling connected to other employees or even to the organization because of that. And they go on exam maybe for a week or 2 weeks and they're with that team, but then they leave them and then they go to be with another team.
Yeah.
I have heard from so many people that these employee resource groups have been life-changing for them and how connected they feel not only to each other, but to the organization because of them. So I am extremely proud of our monthly OMWI talks that we have that I think have changed the culture, as well as our employee resource groups.
That's good advice right there, because there's a lot of leaders out there right now trying to figure out how to keep people connected if everybody's working from home even part of the time, right?
And let me just add to this, and this is a tangential example, but Jill is aware, and you are probably aware too, of the African American Credit Union Coalition.
Yep.
It's a group that I am extremely fond of. I go to their conference every year. And if anybody has been, it feels like a family reunion. It's
absolutely
any other credit union conference you ever go to. And as people have approached me about, when are you going to leave NCUA? Are you thinking about applying for another job? Because my job is transferable. I can do diversity work anywhere. I often think about what it would be like to have to not have that connection with ACUC anymore. Right? I mean, it's such a warm connection that I have to this group. That's the power of an ERG. So that's of an ERG for me, right?
Yep.
That if I leave NCUA and go do this work somewhere else, I don't have that connection anymore. And that's what an ERG can do for an organization, that when people feel connected to other people in the organization, they think twice about leaving. So it's a huge retention tool as well.
I'm a fan also, and their conference every year that they put on to me is also, I've been 3 or 4 times, and one of my favorites, Renee was on the podcast because we were in Kenya together doing stuff with George and the Sakos over there, and I actually got the chance to get to know her much better. She makes me smile. So to the second part of the show, just quickly, the leadership portion, what inspired you to take the gig? To me, it seems like 4 years ago, it's a great position that you've done amazing work with, but where was the inspiration for you personally to go work for the NCUA?
Sure. So before coming to the NCUA, I was at the Internal Revenue Service.
Okay. And
I was there for 5 years. And mostly focused on internal diversity and inclusion, right? Making sure we had a diverse workforce and an inclusive work environment. Because I had been doing it for a while there, I tried to up the IRS's game to say, no, we should be thinking about diversity of taxpayers, right? So if your mission is increasing tax compliance, don't you want to understand the diversity of the taxpayer so you can figure out how we can increase their voluntary tax compliance. So I was trying to push a little bit and expand my role into the external space. Well, there wasn't really, I tried, but there was a lot more to do internally than externally. That's that way. So when I saw this job come up for the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion, and a huge portion of the job was an external focus, that really lit a fire in me, because I think that internal diversity and inclusion is extremely important, yes, but I hadn't yet had the opportunity to really do this work within the industry. I found that really appealing. And not only to mention, I'm the only one, right? Unlike with your banks where you have multiple regulators, NCUA is the sole regulator of credit unions. So when I first started this work, I remember my first couple of weeks on the job, I Googled credit union diversity and inclusion, and I got nothing.
Yeah, there probably nothing would pop up, right?
So this was 5 years ago in 2015. And so things have definitely changed. I'm happy about that.
So, coming from the IRS to working in the credit union space, how has the inspiration changed as you've dug more into credit unions?
So I think that I was extremely proud of the mission of the IRS. I know it's an agency that people love to hate.
Right, of course. Yep.
But it's very mission driven, right? Everybody there knows what the mission is. I love the mission of credit unions.
Yeah.
People helping people. It's so inspiring to know that to be a part of an industry where it's not about profit, it's not about making money, but it's about financial well-being and health of its members. That's an extremely inspiring mission, and I'm happy to be in that space doing this work.
It sucks us in, right?
Yeah.
So as a leader, is there something in lead like that people view as like what it takes to be a good leader that you would like to debunk, like that idea that you have to be something to be a good leader?
I think that two things. One, most leaders think that they have to have all the answers. And I think that that's not the type of leader I am. I hope that those who I lead will tell you that I'm often one to say, I love to surround myself with people who are smarter than me. I think that makes me smarter. If I can find somebody who's smarter than me, that makes me the smart one. And I think a lot of times leaders are threatened by that. They don't want to hire people who are smarter than them. So I think that that's probably, for me, the most important thing, that leaders feel like they have to have all the answers. That's just not the way I lead.
I love that. So is there something that the folks at the NCUA have heard you say so many times they can finish your sentence?
Yeah, my team knows. My thing that I love to say is always assume good intentions.
I
think it's really important. And a lot of times we get into a space where we want to assign intentions to people or think that people are out to get us. I think it's energy saving if you just assume that the intent is good, because then it impacts the way you respond. And, you just keep that positive energy going.
I absolutely love that. That just put a huge smile on my face. There's a question that I started asking here in the second season. It was about the idea of, like, as leaders, sometimes we have to make that difficult decision. As I was looking at that question and thinking about talking to you, not only making that difficult decision, but sometimes, you mentioned it earlier when you started the conversations in the chat, sometimes they're difficult conversations for some. That ability to do that, is that something you've always possessed in you, or is it something that you've had to kind of grow and nurture as you've went along in your career?
Yeah, I think it's something that you grow and nurture. And I'm always on my diversity pedestal. I think that the best decisions are made when you include others in your processing. We as leaders, as people, we have to make tons of decisions throughout the day. And I think that sometimes when you can stop and consult someone who doesn't think like you, actually consult someone who usually disagrees with you, then it helps you to get to that better decision. I think that when I make decisions in a vacuum quickly without consulting others is when I make those bad decisions, right? And it also helps as from a leadership perspective, especially if you can consult people on your team, it helps your implementation to work better.
Yeah.
You get buy-in because you've asked people their opinion. whenever I am running a meeting or we're having to solve a business challenge, one of the things that I always try to do is not put my opinion out there first. Because as a leader, if I put my opinion out there, then people are just going to say, okay, how can we implement what Monica wants to do? And that's not what you want. If you want to get those best ideas from all that brilliant diversity that you have around you, you should let people give you their feedback first and then allow that to inform the decision that you make.
It's funny you say that right now. We're in the midst of doing our strategic planning for CUInsight virtually, of course. And one of the things Jill's been helping us with this is I'm trying not to be the first to talk. So I have all kinds of ideas, but let me listen first, so not just throw mine out. So what you said there that makes total sense to me. Something you mentioned, and it sounded like not only having your team, but having others that maybe even think different than you to bounce ideas off of. One of the things I noticed a ton over the first season of the podcast were how important mentors and networks were in people's lives and in their careers. Is that something? It sounds like you have the network. Is mentoring, and how has that been helpful in your career?
So I've always had mentors. I have unofficial mentors now, people that I call and just say, okay, I'm about to send this email. Just tell me what you think. I think we should all do that. That should be a regular practice. I had one of really huge official mentor at the IRS. Her name was Beth Tucker. She was deputy commissioner at IRS. She saw something in me and took me under her wing. And I'm extremely appreciative of all that she fed into me. I think that one of the things that I like to distinguish is the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, right? So a mentor is someone who you either have a formal or informal relationship with, you meet behind closed doors and you bounce things off of, and they give you advice. A sponsor is someone who believes in you enough that they are putting your name out there when you're not in the room. And they're putting their relationship on the line, their reputation on the line because they believe in you. And I think that having sponsors is critically, you need both. But I think something that I've benefited from in my career is having those sponsors.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. And sometimes you can be very direct and ask people to sponsor you. And sometimes sponsorship is happening and you don't even know it. Right?
You don't even know it, right?
I think that's extremely important to have.
Wow. I appreciate that. That's something I need to think on more. We talk so much about mentors, but the idea of sponsors, I'm thinking of that in my head right now. So that's amazing. Thank you. Was there ever a point in your career where you just maybe felt a little bit of self-doubt and what'd you do to get through it?
Sure. I can remember was a job I had before coming to the Internal Revenue Service. I was at the Food and Drug Administration.
Okay.
I was in an acting executive job, and it was a job I probably wasn't ready for.
Okay. Yeah.
And I applied for the permanent job and I didn't get it. I didn't even get an interview. You're really hurt, but I'm appreciative of the fact that I wasn't ready at the time. Now I can see that. And had I gotten that job, I would have probably been stagnated in my career. And it pushed me to work on myself in a lot of different ways, work on my confidence. And so when that next opportunity for an executive job came forward, I applied for it and I was ready.
Then you were ready that time. That's good stuff. Before we move on to the last part of the show, if you have a free day, nothing on the calendar, what passions do you have outside of credit unions? What does work-life balance or integration look like to Monica?
Right, sure. So those who know me really well know I am an extreme extrovert.
That's why you and Jill probably get along well.
If money weren't an issue, I love answering this question because I know exactly. If I hit the lottery, I know exactly what I would do. I would run a bed and breakfast. I love cooking for people and feeding people and talking to people. So my husband can tell you I would have people over every weekend if I could. So this pandemic is killing me socially, right? but I can tell you, even during the pandemic, while we were not sheltering in place or in my neighborhood, I had this huge speaker. And on Friday nights, I would put the speaker out. Everybody knew at 7:00, the speaker comes out and we would have a dance party on our block. And
that's awesome.
or in front of their house and we would dance. So I would, on a free day, if I could just be around people and feed people and talk to people. That's what I love to do.
That's what you love. It's been interesting since the social distancing and when the stay-at-home orders were like everybody moved the chairs from like the decks to the front yard or from the backyard to the front yard. It just you needed to feel some sort of a connection outside the walls of your home, right? So. Last part of the show, the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid. Your answers don't have to be. First question, what were you like in high school? And do you remember the first time you got into memorable trouble?
So this is interesting. I don't know. I don't remember getting into trouble. I was definitely a leader in high school and an activist still back then in high school.
So what did you, as the young leader and activist in high school, what did you want to be when you grew up? Most of us stumbled into credit unions. So
that's funny. At the age of 5, I can tell you because I still have some of my writings. My mom kept them. I always wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay.
I knew from the age of 5 that I wanted to be a lawyer. I spent a lot of time around a great aunt who watched soap operas. And I'll never forget. I mean, I grew up watching Guiding Light, and there was this one character, Ross Mahler, on Guiding Light. I'm like, I want to be a lawyer like him.
That's awesome.
So I did. I did. I went to law school, and I practiced law for 15 years, and I consider myself now a recovering lawyer.
A recovering lawyer. Yep. So using the skills in a different area. So, do you have any daily routines that if you just don't do, your day feels off?
So, I've developed some during this. My husband and I walk. Every morning, we walk. I live in Washington, D.C., and we have this routine where we walk around the old Walter Reed. And it's a great brisk walk. You got hills up and down. And if I don't do that in the morning now, I feel off, but it definitely gives me energy.
We've done the same. I had told Jill that I was talking to you earlier than expected. So I'm like, we need to push our walk forward a half hour when we get up this morning. We got to get on this. We still need our walk. So, which also did not exist pre-COVID. So
it did not. And I hope I can keep it up.
That's what we've talked about that we hope we just keep doing it, even when we can get back to whatever normal is. So the random question, what's the best album of all time? That one you can listen to front to back, not skip a song.
Oh, wow. I would say any album by Luther Vandross. Okay. It's timeless to me, and I can turn anyone on, and I love it.
Just love it. That's a good one. That's for sure. Like you said, any of his. So I'm a reader. Jill and I have a stack of books around the house. Many have been recommended to us on this show. Do you have a book that either you've gifted others or that you just think everybody should read? Or a few?
I know, right? How do you narrow it down? So I currently am rereading White Fragility.
Yep.
And so that's sitting there. I'm trying to get through, how I just have on my nightstand all the books that I want to read. Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm getting ready to start The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I haven't finished that.
I don't have that one yet. The Between the World and Me, I just ordered a couple of weeks ago. It's actually sitting on the nightstand. So that's.
And then I need to read Becoming. That's sitting there by Michelle Obama. I haven't read it yet. It's sitting there. I need to read it. So that's on my nightstand.
That was a good one. That was one in the beginning of this that I just got on Audible, and during some of the walks before we started walking together, I was listening to Becoming. So awesome. That's a good list. You're adding to the list. So that's good. As you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And my favorite part of this question, what's become less important?
Wow. Spending time with my family. I have 3 kids, teenagers now, 17, 18, and 20.
Okay.
Spending time with them. And I can tell you that during this stay-at-home COVID, that's one of the things I really appreciated. I mean, I feel sorry for the parents who have really little kids that they have to mind during the day. Mine don't need me as much anymore. And so I love that we get to eat dinner together every night.
I was going to say more dinners at home, right?
Yeah, because they can't go anywhere. So, I love that. And if I could do it all over again and tell my 25-year-old self, I would have done more of that before COVID.
Has anything become less important to you over time?
Keeping a clean house.
You're the second person on the show to say that, actually. They're just like, too much other stuff.
Yeah, really obsessed with that. But now it's like, let it go.
Let it go. It was funny in the beginning. I don't know if you noticed this with your kids as well, but Jill's son is 8. And when we were having many more dinners all together, and suddenly he was talking to us, where before it was like, how was your day? Good. What happened? Nothing. Right. It was like he didn't have other friends to talk to. So he was talking to us. We were like, Who is this kid? No. There's a question that I didn't send you in advance. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind?
Oh, wow. My son.
Tell me more.
So I have a son, and I haven't cried up to this point. I will try not to. He was born in kidney failure.
Oh, boy.
And also had cerebral palsy. He's been on dialysis most of his life. I donated my kidney to him when he was 4. It lasted 7 years.
Okay.
And so from the age of 11 to 18, he was on dialysis again. And just this January, he got a kidney. Very excited about that.
Congratulations.
My husband had to give up a kidney in exchange for him getting one. So it was like a swap.
Wow.
And he is graduating from high school tonight.
Oh, congratulations.
We have a virtual graduation tonight, and he's going to college in the fall. So hopefully he'll go, but he got in, and we'll start college. So he is a huge success to me because despite everything he's been through, he just keeps pushing himself. He's always smiling. He has the best attitude. So that's my personal definition.
That might be my favorite answer to that question. So in the 70 some odd shows. Thank you again, Monica, for being on the show. My last question I have for you is, do you have any final asks or thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
Sure. I would just ask that those in the credit union system, that we remember how important diversity, equity, and inclusion are to our credit unions. They're important to our growth. They're important to talent. They're important to innovation. It's important to have diversity in your boardrooms. The more diverse perspectives you have, you just get to better answers and solutions. There's tons of research out there that say that diverse organizations outperform homogeneous organizations. So please keep diversity, equity, and inclusion top of mind. NCUA has a resource and a tool that you can use to help you start your journey, to chronicle your journey, or to even monitor or assess where you are. It is the Credit Union Diversity Self-Assessment. It can be found on NCUA's website. And I ask all credit unions to just look at it, submit your responses to us, yes, but most importantly, use it to determine where you are and where you need to go in your diversity journey. So thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you so much. We'll link to that and everything else we talked about in the show notes so people can find it and they should check it out. If people have additional questions of you, LinkedIn, the Twitter machine, email, what's your poison on contact?
LinkedIn is awesome. I'll just give you my email address. It's mdavy@ncua.gov. Send me any questions, suggestion, anything. I'm open to having conversations or helping people in this journey that they're on.
We will put that in the show notes as well. Thank you again so much, Monica, for being on the show today. I hope you stay healthy and safe and have an amazing day.
You too. Thank you, Randall, so much.
Before we go, I would just like to thank all of you for listening. We couldn't do what we do without you listening and supporting. So thank you very much. Also, a big, huge thank you to Monica for taking the time out of her busy schedule to share her experiences with all of us. And finally, a big thank you to our sponsor, PSCU. Our friends at PSCU have been a longtime partner and supporter of ours at CUInsight. So please make sure to click on their link in the show notes and give them some love. See everything they have going on to help out the credit union community. Also, we are on all the podcast players out there. Apple, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, you name it, we're on it. We would appreciate if you would subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating, maybe even a review on the old Apple podcast machine. It helps with the visibility of the show and for us to tell the credit union story. If you don't happen to think we're worth the 5 stars, forget that I asked and just reach out to me directly and let me know where we can improve. And then also don't forget about the CUInsight Experience podcast book list. If you need some stimulation for the old mind while social distancing, we've got you covered. Get your next book recommendation or your summer read from the guests on our show. Thank you all again for listening. I hope you have an amazing day, and please stay healthy, friends.